Hello there and welcome to our special coverage. With me, I'm Abdurrahim Kashur, coming to you live from Algiers on L24 News. Ukrainian troops are locked in a brutal fight against Russian forces who advance into Severodonetsk, a city central to the Kremlin's bid to capture eastern Ukraine. The regional governor pledged Wednesday they would not surrender, although he added it may be necessary for our soldiers to withdraw to stronger positions. Russia says it's now controls most of the Lugansk region, that includes the city. President Vladimir Zelensky maintained that Ukraine's goal is regaining full authority over its territory. However, Moscow announced Tuesday that it has restored rail and road links to the annexed Crimean Peninsula via Ukrainian cities it now controls. Although Russia threatens to strike more goals in the capital of the West, it keeps delivering the rocket systems. Ukraine says it needs 60 multiple launch rocket systems to have a chance at defeating Russia, suggesting that the number pledged by the West so far may be insufficient. Based on these reports, several questions come to the scene. First, what is the main goal Western leaders want to reach by these deliveries of the long-range missiles, and why Ukraine's president is taking his country to the edge of the unknown resource? All of this is going to be analyzed today in our special coverage by our panel of guests. I'm joined live via Skype platform by Dr. Oleksandra, an international lawyer from Ukraine, and Dr. Yovin Ridley, journalist and political analyst from England. Ladies, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to this debate and discussion. Begins right after this break. And before we delve into our discussion, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that Russian forces have made no significant advances in the Donbass over the past day, but Russia claims to have taken control of 97% of Lugansk, one of the two provinces that make up the region. If confirmed, this would bring Moscow closer to its goal of fully capturing the eastern part of industrial heartland of coal mines and factories.
This is a queue of more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers who surrendered in the city of Mariupol. Although it's unknown what will be their fate there, what's sure is that they are now being directed to Russia for investigation. Kiev is seeking the handover of all the estimated 2,000 soldiers from the Azovstal plant in a prisoner swap, but Russian lawmakers have demanded that some of the soldiers be put on trial. While Ukraine's president says his country's soldiers are well positioned in Severodonetsk battlefield, Russia claimed a near victory in the east. Moscow's triumphal announcement came from Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who said that 97% of Luhansk province had been liberated by Russian forces. These satellite images show the scale of damages, a bird's-eye view on entire neighborhoods destroyed in the east of Ukraine. And this is an attempt from Ukrainian emergency personnel to evacuate people from towns and villages in the eastern Donbass region. Despite the escalating fighting, many are reluctant to leave their hometown.
You know, I'm sick, and I don't want to impose myself on other people and go from place to place. I don't want that. I'm scared, and it's really scary.
Today, another missile fell on Kharkiv. This time, the shelling hit a shopping center, worsening the situation for civilians to find daily groceries.
None of security people was injured. They were in the other part of the supermarket. The entrance was hit by the shelling. Supporting pillars are completely destroyed. Beams are destroyed. Fire extinguishing system was activated, and thanks God, there was no fire.
Day after day, Russian troops continue their advance in the east. Ukrainian officials say Moscow is throwing more and more military resources into the fight, while Kiev keeps making pleas for more military supplies.
Dr. Alexandra, I'll be starting with you since you are in Ukraine. After Russian troops withdrawn from Kiev and put the main focus of the military operation on the eastern part of Ukraine, precisely the Donbas region, do you think now Ukraine could sustain and resist even more that this Russian concentration over the Donbas, or it is lost and will become a Russian land, especially when residents over that especially in Donetsk, Lugansk, choose to join Russia for good?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. In respect to your question, what concerns altering the territory of Ukraine, those matters, according to the Constitution of Ukraine and Article 73 precisely, should be resolved exclusively by an all-Ukrainian referendum. It is therefore unlikely that people in Ukraine would accept any referendums which are held locally in Donetsk or Lugansk, especially at gunpoint. And obviously, the position of our president, as he says often, we do not trade our territory or our people. But at the same time, we will not exclude a hypothetical situation of holding all Ukrainian referendum to resolve these issues. And if people decided to end war, we need to give up the territories of Lugansk and Lugansk, of Donetsk and Lugansk. This very well may happen, but may not. It is very difficult to predict.
Quite understood. Mrs. Ridley, a couple of months ago, Ukraine's president received UK's prime minister and so many other Western leaders in the capital, Kiev. That scene of walking around was considered as a challenge to Putin's operation. And now, Zelensky went last Sunday to the eastern part of the country where the main battle is taking place. Don't you think it was quite risky for him and for the West in general? He could have been taken by the Russian troops or injured or even killed. If that happened, could we have seen an end to this war or another world war?
I think that he's a leader. He likes to be seen at the front, at the sharp end, at the coalface. He's a man of the people. And so it wasn't really that unusual to see him make this move. But you're right, it was very dangerous because if the Russians had captured him, that would certainly pile on to the pressure that the Ukrainian people already have. And it's quite obvious that the Ukrainian people do not want to stop resisting. They not only will continue resisting, but they want about 20% of the land that the Russians have already taken. They will want that back. But the fact that Sergei Lavrov is in Turkey holding talks is a slight sign for
quite interesting. We will come to this point, Milady. Dr. Alexei, coming back to you, how can you consider this visit of the Ukrainian President Zelensky to the eastern part of the country, precisely Donetsk and Lugansk cities? Is it a challenge to Putin saying that I will fight to the last Ukrainian and I won't give up, or just to encourage his soldiers and the Western countries to give him more weapons and to come over to the battlefield?
I personally do not see it as a specific response to any new challenges or what Putin says, because as you may know that President Zelensky has been very heavily involved in the war from day one. And the whole world and all Ukraine was really thrilled about the amount of courage he put into it. He resisted a few attempts to kill him, and I personally do not think that it was in response his any new trips to some very hot military operations were in any attempt to respond to anything. He just continue to do what he was doing all these 3 months. He continued to support Ukrainian soldiers, and he continues to put more pressure to the West, on the Western governments to arm Ukraine, to provide us more support to resist the war.
Understood. All right, moving on to the second point of our discussion. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in Ankara today, Wednesday, to discuss the establishment of maritime corridors to facilitate grain exports in the Black Sea. Lavrov met the Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu in the presidential palace in the capital, Ankara. Turkey's foreign minister said a United Nations plan to restart Ukraine grain exports along a sea corridor was reasonable and requires more talks with Moscow and Kiev to ensure ships would be safe. Russian foreign minister said that the responsibility was on Ukraine to solve the problem of resuming grain shipments by demining its ports.
We are ready to ensure the safety of ships leaving Ukrainian ports and heading for the channels. We are ready to do this in cooperation with our Turkish colleagues.
We think that it is beneficial for discussion of the measures that will be taken for safe navigation of the ships in this mechanism. Also, we want all technical preparations to be completed as soon as possible.
Mrs. Ridley, do you think Turkey, or Turkey, as President Erdogan highlighted recently, do you think he can play a major role to ease the situation between Ukraine and Russia, taking into consideration he was the only one who could manage to bring the top officials from both sides to the table of negotiation in the second round of negotiations?
He is in an ideal position to be able to act as an honest broker, because he is a friend, an ally who is trusted to a certain extent of the Russians. He is also a part of NATO, and as such, he has friends and allies in the West as well. But he's a very pragmatic leader. I mean, on the one hand, technically he's at war with Russia over Syria, because they're both on different sides in the Syrian conflict. But he is able to overcome this issue, and I do think that Turkey can be the trusted power that can bring about some form of peace deal. The very fact that these talks are being held in Ankara today is a good sign.
Quite understood. Coming to you, Mrs. Alexandra, as a Ukrainian, how can you read the diplomacy efforts made so far after this war, the so-called military operation started? Don't you think that diplomacy has failed before the 24th of February and is still failing to reach the ultimate goal, no war?
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. I think my personal position is that diplomacy failed, and failed quite some time, many years before February 2022. In fact, we believe that when Russia annexed the Crimea, there should be more action, there should be better reaction from the West at that point, which could prevent what it is escalated now. So I absolutely side with you that we would want to see more involvement from the Western government as well, trying to understand the situation and help Ukraine in this very delicate issue, because
I'm sorry to cut you train of thought, Mrs. Alexandra, but
sure.
Do you still believe that diplomacy is the only way out for Ukraine from this military operation, the so-called also war?
I think this is never too late. Try to resolve anything by diplomatic measures, even though we might have a little faith in it. But if there is a very slim chance to save lives, and when I'm saying save lives, I mean lives on both sides, because as far as we're concerned, there are more than 30,000 of Russians who've been killed at this war as well. And we do feel sorry for them as well. They are somebody's sons and somebody's husbands. And I'm not mention Ukrainian kids and our soldiers who are who have been slaughtered during this war. And of course, if there are any way to try to resolve it and end the war by diplomatic means, I think we would look for it.
Quite understood. Unfortunately, this is war, and the casualties are always over there. Now, coming to you, Mrs. Ridley, after the new assault on Ukraine's capital this week, it shows that Russia, economically and militarily, could maintain its pressure over the Ukrainian lands for a long period. And at the same time, these strikes were a warning to US lost delivery. Will they pay attention for the next moves, or they will insist even more to make the situation worse? Like UK now, they are delivering new weapons, missiles with the high techno range middle.
Yes, well, I'm deeply uncomfortable about the West's involvement, because they won't go to the aid of the Ukrainians physically, but they are fueling the war by sending long-range missiles, by sending high-tech weaponry that will enable the Ukrainians not to win the war, but to continue fighting. You know, the Ukrainians, no one can doubt their courage, but they are outnumbered by the Russians 7-1. They have taken great losses, as have the Russians. But 1,000 of the Ukrainian soldiers who were captured in Mariupol have now been transferred to Russia. So that's a different form of escalation of the war. Russia has taken 20% of Ukraine at the moment and shows no sign of abating. And this, unfortunately, the Western media has been writing propaganda to give everyone the impression that the heroic Ukrainians are winning, and they're not. You know, they are putting up a jolly good fight. But the West is happy to see them continue fighting. And the reality is, I don't think Russia can win, and I don't think Ukraine can. And if there isn't a diplomatic intervention, then this could go on for 10 years.
Thank you ever so much for these points. Coming to you, Mrs. Alexandra, derived from the words of Mrs. Riley that the Western media are making propaganda, don't you think that Ukraine is being sacrificed for an already agenda made? I mean, they are using Ukraine to fight Russia. Don't you think so?
I think we should look at starting point and what happened, the facts which happened on the ground. And the facts which happened was that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 when it annexed the Crimea. It further continued war on the West, and it brutally invaded Ukraine again in February this year. And in this situation, I think it is very plain. We don't need to look at roots more deeply. Russia does not fight the US or anybody else on our territory. They do fight our people, and they killing our people as well.
On the Thursday, the Ukrainian embassy in Beirut claimed that Russia has sent an estimated 100,000 tons of wheat stolen from Kiev to Syria since Moscow launched its military operation last February. Moscow had also begun to preserve its food exports after imposing a sea blockade in the Black Sea that prevents the transport of Ukrainian crops around the world. Mrs. O'Reilly, do you think and do you really think Russia will stop the grain shipments as Ukraine is claiming? If so, why Russia would do that as the first place? How this will serve its goal?
Well, while Russia is at war with Ukraine, it is also forcing some form of economic war on the West because inflation will be driven up. We're already seeing that in Britain and elsewhere. And the 38 countries that include some of the world's biggest economies in the OECD are really concerned about how inflation is being driven up because of the lack of things like the grain exports. And the Russian invasion has brought tough sanctions against the Russians themselves. And really, globally, everyone is suffering because of this war. But unfortunately, Russia, I don't think, is in a mood to back down at the moment. It is coming over as being very reasonable in Turkey during these talks about how to get the grain exports out to the rest of the world. But the reality is, if Russia is not in a mood to help the West, and why should it, with the West forcing all these sanctions on Russia, they will play a game over this grain. And it is causing a huge crisis around the world where millions of innocents
are suffering. Yes. Very good indeed. Very good indeed. Mrs. Alexandra, reports said that the world was already witnessing the food crisis in several countries, especially the African ones and some parts of the Asian continent, to severe droughts and economic crisis. It was the reason. So why would Ukraine and the West pointing finger to Russia as the main reason for the food crisis and the grain shortages?
It is, for me, it is very clear. Russia escalated the war. Russia tries to blackmail the whole world now with grain. And grain, it just became one of numerous of Russian tools to lead the battle, try to win this war in Ukraine. And what I think is important in this is that it would not succeed in its attempt to blackmail the world in this way, just because it will set a precedent. And how would you know that it's not going to happen again if Russia would want something it couldn't receive easily, or anyone else? So in my opinion, yes, we want diplomatic way to resolve this. Yes, we don't want other people to suffer it. But would it be rightly just try to give up at Russians' gunpoint and agree to whatever they want? I don't think so.
Understood. Coming back to you, Mrs. O'Reilly, Luca Russo, who works as an analyst for food crisis within the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, he said that we need to clarify that today there is no global food shortage. Food is available. To give you a number, each year the world produced about 780 million metric tons of wheat, and the shortage for this year is only 3 million less. So How is the Ukraine crisis threatening food supply?
Well, I think with food supplies, you don't look at what's in your plate, on your plate, or on your table today. You look in the cupboards and see what is going to be there for next year. And the grain backlog problem is having a huge impact globally. And we're maybe not feeling the crisis now, but 12 months down the line, I think that we will be in a critical situation. At the moment, millions of tons of seeds cannot be sent overseas because of the Russian blockade. But there's also next year's harvest. If the current grain is taking all the storage space in the silos, where will this year's crop, this year's harvest from Ukraine, where will that be stored? And as I say, this is going to have a knock-on effect. So at the moment, yes, we have food on the table, but what about further down the line? Food security is something that is judged years in advance. It's not what is happening now, it's looking to the future.
Very good indeed. Now, moving on to the last point, probably we will discuss. The former German Chancellor Angela Merkel defended her policy towards Russia on Tuesday, saying that she did not have to apologize for having relied on diplomacy and trade to try to avoid a war in Ukraine. Speaking for the first time in public since stepping down from political life 6 months ago, the former leader once again harshly condemned the Russian adventure in Ukraine, which she said has no justification.
I don't see why I should tell myself it was a mistake, so I'm not going to apologize. What I wondered is, could more have been done to prevent such a tragedy? Because I already see the situation as a great tragedy. Could it have been avoided? In retrospect, I'm actually glad I don't have to blame myself for not trying to prevent an event like this. On the contrary, I've luckily tried enough with successive French presidents, and that gives me a form of appeasement.
Mrs. Alexandra, after this statement by the ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel, don't you think that the new world leaders such as Biden in USA, Scholz in Germany, and NATO new policies played a vital role to escalate the tension between Ukraine and Russia, which is now a direct confrontation?
As somebody who lived in Ukraine for the majority of my life and who in particular lived in Kyiv, I personally don't think that we need to blame the West in what's happened. And I strongly saw the support Ukrainians have for the EU integration and for NATO integration as well. That's why I wouldn't say that it was something imposed on us. We can understand and have reasonable thinking of what's happening in the world. And I think to join the NATO, it was our choice with Russia. And who started the war? It was our choice. And who started the war? It was again Russia Federation. That's why, for me, it's a bit strange when people trying to shift the focus and try to find anybody to blame except them, except Russia, like Angela Merkel didn't allow Ukraine to join NATO. And
sorry to cut you train of thought, Mrs. Alexandra, but Russia has made a point that they started this military operation based on the idea that NATO expansion eastward Europe is as a threat, a great threat to its existence. So this is the idea that they started this military operation, and they have called Ukraine again and again to step back from the idea of joining NATO. So this is the main idea, don't you think so? If Ukraine's President Zelensky stepped back, this operation wouldn't happen.
The truth is Ukraine is not yet NATO member, And we've been knocking the door for quite many years now, and we've never been accepted there. So for me, any speculation or reasoning that the law has been launched because of Ukraine's NATO membership seems to be a bit superficial and unfair, because again, we are not, and we were not going to be a member of NATO in any foreseeable future.
Understood. Mrs. Riley, 30 seconds to end the show. The floor is yours to put an end for this debate.
Well, the doctor is right. You know, Russia did start this war. It did invade, but Putin did say back in December, I want to talk, and Biden ignored him. And he kept threatening, if you continue with your NATO exercises, something will happen, and the world ignored him. And this is where we're missing politicians of gravitas like Angela Merkel, because she would have recognized straight away what was going to happen. Putin is a man who needs handling, and she could do it. And unfortunately, we are now in this mess because there are too many lightweights in government in the West these days.
Thank you, Eva, so much for your participation. Mrs. Riley from England and Mr. Alexandra from Ukraine. Thank you, dear guests, for your thorough analysis. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on L24 News. Bye for now.